back to another episode of Word Up with Danny Katz. On today, this blessed Samhain, I am here with Nish, with the co-host of Primadonnas of the Gutter podcast. Nish, I know you have your own podcast. I've been dying to talk to you for so long. I'm so grateful that it's today, this extra witchy day. Nish, how you doing?
I am thrilled, and this is a great way to get my day going. I have some wonderful plans tonight, and
Ooh.
yes, I love that you love Prima Donnas of the Gutter. And before we get going, girl, I just want to say you look fabulous, as I said privately, but you have one of my favorite smiles out there. I love your smile so much.
Thank you. I was self-conscious of my smile my whole life. That was before I grew the gap, just because it's so big. And now I just kind of embrace the ridiculousness of it.
Oh my God, gorgeousness of it. You gleam. I love it. You can't help but smile back. I'm smiling back, just so you know.
Oh, yay. Well, Nish, I'm so curious, is Halloween a regular for you? Like, do you tear it up every year? What are your big plans? What are you going as?
So I never go out and tear it up. And I think the last time I'm trying to even remember. I can't even remember. I do have a funny Halloween story when I was little, but I do generally just practice every holidays mostly on my own in the
Mhm.
last many years. This year is different, and I have private processes. I believe this is a time to honor our ancestors and our dead, and look at also how we connect with other people and other cultures that are also doing this in different ways. I'm very attracted to how Los Dias de la Muertes goes on down in Mexico. How amazing is that practice? When I first saw that and heard it and saw videos, I was moved to tears, because parking out in the graveyard with your ancestors, with food and in celebration with lights. I mean, this is what it's about for me. And we can tie in all of the Celtic stuff and all that, but I was we're closer in proximity here to Mexico, that is so right here.
Mhm. Are you in California?
I'm in Washington, but as
Okay.
far as like Celtic lands, that's over the pond, even though I have plenty of that blood, but it's just, I'm in touch with that. I lived in New Mexico for years, and my mother loved going to Mexico. I grew up in a house with a lot of Aztec and Mayan artifacts. And so I've always felt really tied into a lot of that cultural stuff just through my mama.
I love that. I feel this very strong resonance with Mexican culture. I don't even know if it's in my bloodline, but in Los Angeles, it was always like, go to West Hollywood and be with the gays for their parades, and that was super
Yes.
fun. But when I found the Dia de las Muertas celebration at the Hollywood Cemetery, I was like, okay, this is my thing. Like, now I can really drop in to this celebration and this ritual. Like, then it just all made sense to me at that point.
Yeah, it makes sense to me too, because how is celebrating your ancestors not something that should be universal? Like, how is that? How can you look down on that? How can you think nasty of that? How can you do anything but go, this just makes sense to me? And to do it with food and song and candles, with tears and laughter,
Yeah.
it just vibes. And I don't think, as far as I know, I don't have any of those bloodlines in me as well, but I certainly honor it.
Totally. Yeah. I don't know if it was when I moved to New Mexico, because that's where I am, but I just feel such a resonance. I've surrendered to maybe never traveling internationally again, because I'm not going to deal with this Michigas on any level.
I feel you.
And if and when it changes up, I would love to spend some quality time in Mexico City, and really drop in with that culture.
Yeah, I've had a good time in parts of Mexico, definitely. And of course, like anywhere else, and I've lived in LA, you have to be situationally aware. I don't care where you are. This is just a reality. And for small town people that may not have understood that in the past, I think they're starting to get that. But for those of us that have had a lot of city time,
Mm.
we know this. I've always been shocked by people that leave their doors unlocked. I still know people that do it. I'm like, oh my goodness. No,
Yeah.
no, no. Make it harder.
I just saw someone here who's like, I left my car running to warm up and I ran in the house, and when I came out, it was gone. And I'm like, I'd be shocked if you came out and it wasn't gone. Like, why would you do that?
It's so sensible. And that's what I'm saying, this like lack of perspective or worldview sometimes when you're in small places. And that's fine. I love those small places too. And when I encounter them, I certainly enjoy that sense of safety, but I will be the one locking the door.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. No, I mean, I think there's something to be said for growing up in a big city with that street smarts and then leaving the big cities. I don't know if you're living in like Seattle and a place big. I'm pretty over the whole urban frequency myself.
Oh yeah, I couldn't get out fast enough. I actually in my heart I'm a country girl, even though I was born in a capital city and I've lived in major cities. I am in a small town now that's trying to become a city, and the more it's becoming, the less I am becoming towards it. I want I want less people, Danny, not more people, especially the way the world is now and how people are pitted against each other over ridiculous stuff that we recognize as something that's manipulated.
It's so obvious to people like you and me, but yeah, I'm the same. I mean, I'm watching in the past couple of years, there's been such a flood of Californians and New Yorkers to Santa Fe, and I'm realizing this might be getting too big and too urban feeling for me. You know, like it's a little too chic now, it's a little too full of itself. So yeah, at this point, maybe 70,000 people is too much for me.
Oh yeah, that's way too much. Mine is like grown to 19,000. But I'm really familiar with Santa Fe. I love it. I love Taos. I lived in the Ortiz Mountains above that little town they call Madrid, not Madrid,
Ooh.
Madrid.
The coolest people live in Madrid. That is such a unique culture in that little mining town. There's just so many interesting things happening there, all underneath the surface.
It's a great space. And I lived up in the mountains. So we had to, and I'm sure it's still that way, that it's almost like you need an ATV from the highway to get to your house. We were off rugged road, off grid, the whole thing, in an old miner's cabin that had a straw bale house attached to it, and then a whole bunch of straw bale buildings, and it was terraced. It was a beautiful, beautiful space. And I hope to live that way again, but it's not in the cards right now. However, in general, northern New Mexico is my second favorite place.
What's your first?
Where I am.
Oh, I love that you're living in your favorite place. That's epic. You're winning the Earth game.
It's this part of Washington, Danny. So it's the west coast of Washington. And so if you cut Seattle out,
yeah,
and its suburbs, then it's all paradise to me, including the San Juan Islands.
So beautiful. So does the vibe, like, how does the vibe feel for you there? It's such like an edgy, I mean, edgy in terms of geography, but edgy in terms of like cultural engineering and ground zero-ness. Like, how is it where you are?
Well, a lot of it's unrecognizable from the time I've been here. I've been back here 3 times. It's like I left to go to LA, and that was the second time I lived in Burbank, actually. The second time I lived in that part of California, and it's like the first time I just couldn't get out fast enough. I had really great friends. The underground horror scene's wonderful. All the people in the business that are not the front people that that are everywhere are fucking awesome. Ooh, I don't know if I can say that.
You can speak super freely. You can swear as you'd like.
But there, as you know, there are a lot of amazing people in LA, along with all the nasty, pillow-faced folk. And
Right.
so it's a balance. And what I think is going on, Danny, is this balance is kind of hitting everywhere now. So the energetics are weird here. I'm close enough to Portland to feel some of that, especially as that energy is coming here, but I'm also quite removed. So it seems like they want to annex where I am into
Mhm.
that area because I'm in the gorge. Uh,
Okay.
and they're pushing that far out now. And so NASA said it bought a whole huge chunk of land out here
Boy.
in my town
No.
on the Columbia River, which is so bizarre. And they have, I can't remember what they're calling it something. So it doesn't say NASA, but it's actually NASA.
Right.
And then they've electrified my town with all these crazy new cables that I've had friends come from out of town going, what are these cables? They're like gigantic fiber optic cables above ground. Now I've seen these getting laid underground in Colorado, right? In some of
Right.
the cities, they don't like the overhead wires. So
Right.
we've got all this stuff that's happening very fast, and a lot of people containers are being built now. And this housing that looks like it's future projects, right? That same kind of housing. It kind of looks all right on the surface, but I can see its future.
Well,
And
it's all going to be like smart and surveillancy, which for me is like a deal. I'll live in a tent. I'm not
oh
doing
yeah,
that.
it's all getting set up to be that. And this is what's of importance for me, and why hopefully I can ultimately get out. I'm stuck here right now. It's not easy as it was to move around, especially
No.
moves. Yeah.
No.
Yep. It's becoming more difficult, which is a little bit worrisome.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely like, because I'm noticing the pace of this is interesting. A lot of the pieces are much faster than I thought, and then a lot of the pieces are slower, especially for those of us who know how it's going. So I just keep reminding myself, like, I live in the future, plenty of time to build my sovereign fortress. I'm just, it's a lot of like mental chatter around getting through my first apocalypse, at least in this incarnation.
I love you. I love you. My first apocalypse. Yes. Yes, girl. Um it's very tricky, and the thing that makes it hard if you are not participating in the land of the dead, like Black's Law land and all
Right.
that, it's even trickier because they're really cinching everything in via crypto everything,
Mm.
and it's becoming very hard to sidestep that. So like in the old world, which I'm calling what was before 2020,
Mhm.
it's because we're not in that world anymore. Like
No.
let's take midwives for example. So in Illinois, when I lived there, midwives were absolutely like you'd go to jail, like real midwives, not nurses that got the certificate and you're in the hospital, but you're still a midwife girl. And no, I'm talking about the old school, and they're almost all women that come in, and these are old school births. This
Mhm.
is, you're in like the best of hands you could possibly be in. And it's all really underground. It's super underground, like things like that have had to be for so long, and including the different kinds of, say, exchange for services kind of stuff, currency and all that. And then so they come in, they help you birth your baby. They go through the whole process from the beginning when you decide that, if you've been able to contact the network and get into the midwife circuit.
Mhm.
There's in Illinois, there's a certain, well, there was, I don't know anymore, but there's this whole comfrey would get passed around, and was one of the signs if you had it in your front yard, because a lot of people think comfrey is a weed.
Oh,
It was like one of those things, just like in Old Sicily. I have my papa Sicilian,
mhm.
and the chimaruta, you could recognize others with the chimaruta. And so it's like signaling like that. And then
Mhm.
word of mouth. And then, someone will contact you, and then it's a process all the way to the end. They deliver back your placenta, all this important stuff. Your baby's not in the record. It's not a straw man. It's not sold on the market. The whole process. These are real midwives, and that
Right.
network is very, very real. But what are we going to do now? Because it's difficult at any junction now to even communicate. You can't trust like the emails with this. If say you're a midwife, it's
Right.
very, very difficult. And because everything is on a blockchain now, or moving to a blockchain, the crypto aspect, which was sold to us one way, and now we see the way in which it's going to play out. Right.
Yeah.
So there's all these unseen tethers of control. And really, truly, I'm going to name it for what it is: slavery around us. And the underground healers, the underground people that don't want any part in the land of the dead, are, I'm supposing, finding new ways to communicate, but it's not going to be like it was.
I think we're going back. I think we're going back to snail mail, to checks, to like a slower, more analog. It's the only way I can see being able to maintain our privacy and our sovereignty in the midst of the sham show.
The whole point is to get everyone registered and tagged.
Of
I
course,
mean,
but we're not going to do that.
no, well, we certainly aren't, but
No.
it's not willingly. But the thing is, and people don't understand this, and it's almost impossible to just be online right now with all the user agreements. I mean, there's just so many ways we're becoming ensnared that we don't realize the depth of it. Now, this is separate from saying taking something patentable into your body, where you've actually then signed away your control of your ownership of your own vessel. And this is outside of the legal Black's law system. This is a separate thing from your placenta that had been sold at birth, right?
Right.
This is like something new point oh, and it's a deeper way to ensnare people that they're not aware of. And it's part of how we're becoming pulled from what we consider the natural world deeper into the facsimile of that, which is now the digital world, which is including all these states of virtual reality, augmented reality, etc. There's going to be a point where, well, the receipts are already there. So there's a lot of chatter right now where you're getting these eye um, procedures to help your sight, but they're also, some of them have all this stuff people want, where it can have some digital ability to hook up into systems. This is out there. And the thing is, I think we've seen enough stuff through pop culture, through the way things are moving, and then the chatter starting that that's own tech. And then if you are patented and have signed away your permission with your biosuit, they're talking about turning off your eyes if you don't pay. And so you go blind, right? And you have to pay. It's going to be similar to, and this is just a little bit of my side psychic eye, the periphery. It's going to be similar to what Adobe did. You used to own your Adobe Photoshop and all
Right.
that. Now it's in the cloud. You can't own it. You have to actually pay a monthly fee to
Right.
access it. This is going to be what goes on with all the tech people are taking into themselves via progress. And what they're saying is, uh, what they're saying is for the good of all, but we know goods are sale, human sale, and all this
Ooh,
for
really good
the
point.
yeah, and
Good
for the
point.
betterment. There's no betterment for you here. I mean, there is just, unless you've got all the money in the world and feel fine about paying for the use of your eyesight and whatever, the use of something You've got your body, first of all, but say you have an augmented arm, say you got bombed, something terrible happened and you got a prosthetic. How wonderful is it that we can do that? But how terrible the application will be with the way they are looking at this in the future. And Danny, that whole thing about you will own nothing and be happy, well, that actually includes your body.
And do you think that there's going to be a point in this where the people who are going on with it are going to is there a point with them where they're like, okay, now this has gone too far and they're going to snap out of it? Or do you think that they're just completely gone?
I think that there is a big wave right now where people are going, this has gone too far. And I think ultimately when we start seeing this deeper control where you have to pay to continue to, well, maybe use your body, any part of it, people will protest, but they're already owned by these patentable companies.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a whole bunch that can say about the three main companies that basically own everything in our lives.
Is this the Vanguard, BlackRock?
And State Street. They all, yeah, and they're all intermeshed and own within each other's companies. And now there's an above that. That's the pyramid of money. And the
Right.
pyramid of money is one thing, and money gets you so far, but there is way more beyond the money. So following the money is great. That's fantastic because most people are in the slavery system of monies.
Right.
And so it's good to know how all that works, but there is way more going on above that level that deals in an interdimensional frequency field. And this is when we start talking about things that are um, a different currency, say the soul element.
Mhm.
And because the soul is considered an element in some circles, not an intangible thing. It's actually absolutely acknowledged and is something that can be mined
Mhm.
from, well, humans.
I mean, I feel like I'm experiencing that. I feel like we all are, where there's so many people who were in my life, who were close, and I'm like, wait, what happened to your soul? Like, what happened to your humanity? In addition to the critical thinking aspects. But when you're talking about like these interdimensional beings or interests, is this like the secret societies? Is this behind slash above the secret societies? Are we now delving into realms of no longer human?
Well, we're definitely not talking about humans. And I think it's one of the ways to consider this is permeability. So if you think about how, um, or buoyancies is a good way. There's a everything kind of has its own buoyancy, and the heaviest densest stuff sinks,
Mm-hmm.
and then it moves up in buoyancy. But just because something's dense doesn't mean it has no value, especially in the physical realm, because it's the dense things down at the bottom of the water, for example, can be very valuable and things people seek after. But then there are very buoyant things that are also valuable. So if we look at this esoterically through, say, an interdimensional lens, and we start to understand maybe that some of our energetic bodies that are hard to conceptualize are
Mm-hmm.
playing a part in buoyancy in the field. Now, people need to understand what the field is. Now, I'm in the Tesla camp of the etheric field, and that stuff all makes sense to me. All that math makes sense to me. Steinmetz makes sense to me. And so I'm kind of coming at that, but this is interdimensional. So the monies that people follow, that's in the physical plane. That's a
Right.
physical situation, but it's got dimension, and the dimension is where these things that I'm considering non-human, but very much real, get access into this realm through permeability. So through actually using our bodies, using a human body as, say, well, like an avatar or a coat or a car, a vessel. But where does one draw the line here? In the new age, you hear a lot about walk ins, right? You hear all this technology around some of these ideas of what it is to be a human being or a Homo sapiens sapien. And I think we need to be very loose sometimes to understand the deeper meaning. And I appreciate people that get very narrow minded and hone in and practice, the absolute deconstruction and then reconstruction of hard stuff. But there's much more in the world around us than just that kind of science through materiality.
Mhm.
And so this idea has to expand for people, within people, to understand it. But yeah, like, one of the ways people understand this concept is through demonic possession.
Mhm.
That's limited. That's very limited, but most people, whether they believe in it or not, kind of have an idea what that is. A
Right.
demon has taken possession of a human body. That people can understand. Well, if you think about other things out there, and they may not all be bad, I'm not here to give a character judgment on that. I'm just saying that there's the vessel. The terminology's been around for thousands of years. It's
Mhm.
just, it's been ping ponged back and forth through different languaging, and it brings us to the current where we are. And I think people are starting to get an idea of how all this dimensionality works. Danny, a circle is actually a sphere, right? From one dimension to the next, it's quite different, but it's the same thing.
Right. Right. Nish, I'm fascinated by the breadth and depth of your knowledge and how many realms and layers of those realms you know so much, you understand so much. I had listened to a bunch of your podcasts with Emily, a few years ago, but I really became a fangirl with Primadonnas of the Gutter, which is one of my favorite podcasts.
I
I
love
love
it.
I love it so much. How you guys tackle fashion and pop culture, and it's just like such a rich area. And the way that you'll deconstruct things and take it back to different centuries and what was in vogue then. So I'm very curious about your path and how you came to know what you know. Like, were your parents hip to all of this? Did you grow up like not as programmed as the rest of us? Like, can you walk me back a little bit as to how you came to be the awesome cultural maven that you are?
Oh, thank you, Danny. You're so sweet. I've got to say, I love Primadonnas of the Gutter too. I love, love, love it so hard. I get so excited every time we start tossing ideas, and we usually just show up and record, girl. And then I want to definitely give the proper shout out, because Amy D is a delight to work with. Oh my God, I feel blessed that we came into orbit, and we just fit so well. So, and I know you love Miss Amy D,
I
the D.
love Amy D. I like, God bless her, and I love your guys' chemistry as podcast
Yes.
hosts. Like, you'll be speaking for a while, and I'm like, damn, she knocked that out of the park. And then Amy comes in, and I'm like, whoa, she took it to another level. And you guys keep just like raising. I love you guys together.
It's good. Well, she grounds me out. She gives receipts because I get so
Yeah.
far out. And we need Amy to come in with the receipts because I'm just so far out. And she does it. She delivers hardcore. So it makes the show dynamic. As far as me, I have had quite a life. And it was just it from the get-go of when I woke up in my crib. I've told this story a million times, so I'm not going to rehash it all here, but I woke up in my crib, and it was in a very specific space that we moved out of when I was 6 months old. And when I was able to talk, I communicated it to my mamo. She said it could only have been that space. We moved out at what I said, 6 months. And the realization, though, that started the journey here was I got in, I thought I was having a sleep paralysis for real. And I'm trying to move, and you know how those things go. I'm trying to scream, but I am screaming. And then I'm trying to like adjust and all this. And I realized I was in a little baby body, and I saw my fingers, and then I heard the door creak, and then here's my mom, and then she's over me saying, "Hi, there you are," blah, blah, blah. That was my awakening into this experience. And so from that point on, it was a crazy journey, but I've been involved in fashion and art my whole life. And then my mother was very involved in a lot of, she liked powerful people. And
Mhm.
so there were a lot of powerful people around us. And I think just being open and an observer, I was always weird. I think a lot of us were, right? Hail
And
to the
how do you
weird
define
kids.
weird? How did your weird express?
Well, my weird expressed in kind of almost weirder ways for other people, but because there are stories of me bilocating and stuff like this, there's some I remember these stories, but it's good to have those stories, and which is why I scared some of my family.
Mhm.
But I was like a lot of us, I was a loner. I
Mhm.
just didn't fit into the circles around me, but I was also scared. People were afraid of me, so I didn't get beat up or anything. Like people were straight up afraid of me, which still happens. And
And is that because of a strong personality? Is that because you're witchy? Is that because of your relationship with non-ordinary reality?
I think it's a combo. I
Mhm.
do think it's a combo. And when I was a very young child, it was well, it was definitely a combo then, but strangeness has, I guess, I'm gonna throw this in air quotes, paranormal stuff around me has been very prevalent, like a lot of us, right? And but I did do some crazy things, like there's the bilocation stuff that's crazy,
Mhm.
and other stuff. So but yeah, I have always been different in my expressing, in my adornment.
Mhm.
So there's that. um I went through a lot of hardships. There was some, there was trafficking involved in my childhood that gave me a very clear insight. I call it trafficking light, because there is this is like a family thing, and it's probably not even the right show for this, but it was almost like grooming, but not
Mhm.
quite, because I was in the mix of it, and bad things happened, and I was talking about those bad things, by the way, and got shut up and all that. And I'm fortunate enough, as one of these people, that one of the people I accused, that I absolutely got terrorized for accusing, later ended up in prison for what I was accusing him of, for doing it to his own kids. And he stayed in prison for a long time, and then he got out and became a famous artist. He's now dead, and he was a famous Santa Fe artist.
Whoa.
And I loved him. I loved him. I've talked about that story a lot, but I got tossed around in that circle.
Mhm.
And the validation was that I never got an apology, but it's on record. He's on record going to jail for what I said. And like a decade before, when it was happening to me and I was being silenced. And, so I have a lot of receipts. I have receipts proving a lot of what I can say, where a lot of people don't have them, which is just fine, because people like me are saying, I believe you, to a
Right.
lot of people that are having people say, well, where, prove it, prove it. And I'm like, this person's telling a story I believe, and
Right.
I have receipts. I have direct connection to big stories that made the world news, direct connections because of my mom Mo.
So is your mother famous? Is she like high society?
She's been dead for decades now, and that was Iskandala. Absolutely a crazy story, which I've told. But she was not like, I wouldn't call her, I don't know, fame is such a weird thing. Had she was known in certain circles, yes, quite known, very, very well known. But she was also, she was a model in the 70s, and so she had exposure through being a model, through well-known means, but then she herself became, uh how do we say this, a scout,
Mm-hmm.
and had her own agency and was scouting for two big agencies that are very well known. And I just I don't know. So there's, there's ties to her being at the White House and stuff. It's a tricky one, her story, and it's one where I got when she passed, and I'm saying that lightly because it wasn't her, it was, there's a story there, but I was told to walk away by the legal community around her that I had known and had been in communication with all those people when she was alive because, well, I was her daughter and I was in those circles. And so there's a lot there with all that that's like so sorted. I've been kind of releasing some of this with Emily and other people slowly. And some of it I'm starting to talk about a little bit more, but it's just so sorted.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, she was well known in circles. She definitely had a face that was out there, and it opened me up to, and here's what I want to say, cataloging of inventory, human inventory, mostly young girls and boys. And a lot of these agencies, especially in the 80s, that you thought were glamorous were actually participating in this trafficking.
Wow.
It's all real. It's all real. It's worse than people think. So when people want to talk about people like Tracy Twyman and say it's all bollocks, no, it's all real. What Tracy stumbled upon is just the surface of what was going on. Of course, we see this with emails released from WikiLeaks, right?
Right.
Everyone wants to burn the messenger and totally get what do we call it, gaslighted now from the actual message, reading the actual mail from these people. If you read the mail, you would never think of any of those people as human again, and most people out there never read the mail except for people like us that are curious.
Yeah. When I'm curious to know like how far back you think this goes. I've had, and definitely with the help of Emily, like remembered a lot of my own programming and the gross stuff that was done to me. And for my 18th birthday, my father sent me, I was in college at the time, the VHS of the Manchurian Candidate. And as a proper Jewish American princess, I was super annoyed. I'm like, what the fuck kind of gift is this for my 18th birthday? Like, I want a Movado. I want a car. Like, this is stupid. And it didn't occur to me till just a couple of years ago, like, wait a minute. I think he was trying to tell me something. And I talked to a psychic about it, and the psychic said he wasn't trying to tell you about your programming. He was trying to tell you about his programming. And that really upended my, what I thought I understood about MK Ultra mind control programs, where I was just like, wait a minute, how far back does this go?
It goes way back, and I just gotta say, girl, I grew up with lots of Jewish American princesses, and we used to not say it that way, and I'm not gonna say it the way we said it back in the day when we were all feeling it. And so had a good time. Oh my God, all the good memories. Anyway, so I love that you just said that. Um, and so with all this, it goes way back. This goes way back. I think I see it. I see I see evidence of it in petroglyphs and in hieroglyphs. I see talk of it in old tomes and old literature. It's been with us from the beginning. And now, in the woo circles, so first of all, humans have never been top of the food chain, and that's, I know that's hard for a lot of people that are really invested in their experience of life and being human, but it's true. Even though humans have domesticated lots of stuff around them, including other humans and all this, we're still not at the top of the food chain.
Mhm.
And this is an interdimensional thing. But if
So
we
who
start
is?
looking, well, that's what we were talking about earlier with these interdimensionals that are moving through. So I don't like saying things like the reptilians and stuff like that, because I don't know. So personally, this for me personally, my experiential stuff has mostly all been the bad stuff that happened to me was all been by monsters in human suits, right? So I
Okay.
couldn't say, well, that's this or that, but they were not human.
Mhm.
You know, humans just wouldn't do this to little kids. They
Right.
just would not do this. So there, and now we understand that there's this subcategory of psychopaths and sociopaths and this type in in the psychological field. And when there's a lot of psychological profiling done on major characters that we know of that have been those people, that
Mhm.
so the serial killers, the serial rapists, the cannibals, etc., those terms get applied to this type of person, but these are not humans.
Mhm.
This is the Trojan horse. They are something inside of the human. And I think that psychology's gotten in the way, except for depth psychology. Now, I love me my Jung, but not the cold of Jung.
Mhm.
And the psychology has enabled this, just like we're seeing now by terming pedophiles as the new term they have out there for them now, right?
Right, right. That we're supposed to have compassion for and not judge and groom our children to just hand over to them.
Oh, I can't believe that it's got a psychological title and that people are trying to gear up empathy for what is that even?
It's-
Pedophiles. What's their new tag?
I
It
think it's
is
minor attracted persons,
yes, thank you.
which is
Maps.
interesting because it's the same as MAPS, the psychedelic thing, which I have my own opinions about.
But isn't it crazy? So that's now they're normalizing this, just
Right,
like they're normalizing cannibalism and all this other creepy shit that is, to me, not humanistic behavior. This is something else.
right.
And the fact that the field of psychology, and this should be no surprise for people, is so deeply involved in all of this
Mhm.
is more evidence that Tavistock is still going,
Hardcore.
that social engineering is still very much afoot, because these are new terms, just like SADS, right? Sudden adult death syndrome. I mean,
That's a
come on.
thing. That's a real thing. People just,
People, really, I mean,
right.
it can't be more clear. And so this is all at play. You know, I want to bounce back because I didn't quite answer a question earlier. And this was the pop culture question. And this was the significance of what Amy D and I are doing at Primadonnas. Everything and why we chose to do this.
Mhm.
Because all this stuff that we're talking about, Danny, all of this stuff is there in pop culture. This is the genesis of it. And so, and it's really it's hard not to well, for me, I've always loved pop culture, and I've certainly been a part of it through the underground as an artist, right? Because you don't have to have people recognize you to be an undercurrent. Recognition is hubris, and it's something because people recognize you, and we see that through historical movements of someone that didn't get recognized in their life, was actually ostracized, and then they rediscover them later, 50 years, 100 years, 20 years, whatever. And
Right,
those are some real truths out there because they just were not seen. Pop
right.
culture is your best way if you're looking at it with the correct, I don't say correct, if you're looking at it with a certain stance,
Mhm.
you can look right through it and see where we're being taken as a collective, because pop culture is popular culture,
Right.
and we're being, and it's like popcorn. It's not just, you don't just have one kernel, you pop up a whole bowl, baby, right?
Keep eating and eating and eating, even though your stomach hurts.
Right. And so pop culture will take you there. And this is the importance of that. So, where at one level, it's really fun to kind of find your sense of what you love moving through something you weren't exposed to before. An adornment is such a great way to do that. Oh, wow. I didn't even know, that you could wear that way. Or look at that as a piece of jewelry. This is awesome. And stuff like that. So it's cool on that level. But then we see how they're actually manipulating us through a very complex and very curated uh, set of images and ways of being and clothing to wear to represent something that you're being told to represent. And it became very clear to me looking back through historical context at when labeling started to pop up. Why was it and why is it so many people need to see Gucci's label on their clothing, right?
Right. And those interlocking G's, like
Why?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I'm not going to answer that here right now, but it's like, why is this important? And that's a
Right.
question to answer, to look at and question why. And it's branding, and we call it your brand now, everyone's brand. And we talk about that open, but really, what is branding? And this becomes again of goods, of the placenta you've been sold into this slave market through your placenta, and branding is a part of the process. What happens to cattle? They get branded,
Right.
we're chattel. We are being branded and we're paying for it on our own. And so it's important to know how that's playing out. And this is what Primadonnas do. It's great to relish in it, know what you're doing. If that's what you want to do, that is fantastic. I don't have any problem with it, and I actually don't have any problem with anyone's ignorance either. Do what you're going to do, but it's an interesting thing to start questioning. Why are you attracted to this thing suddenly? Why do you need a midriff this season? Why were you in skinny pants the last 2 years and now you're in bell bottoms? These kinds of things. Start asking yourself, why do you all of a sudden, you didn't like bell bottoms and then now everyone's wearing them? Now you're in them. Okay. What's
Right.
going on here, girl? How'd you all end up in some bell bottom? You never liked bell bottom, you know?
Right, right. I mean, as we're talking, because I've always been into fashion as the aforementioned Jewish American princess, but it seems like fashion is social engineering, right? Like I'm thinking back to the 80s, which was when they took women out of the household, post second wave feminism. Woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, and put them in these big shoulder pads and kind of had them like emulating men, right? So as I'm like flashing back in my mind to the different kind of fashion trends that I've experienced, like I'm starting to see fashion as social engineering.
100%. And see, this is interesting you mentioned that, because in the 1940s was that first wave of those shoulder pads.
Oh, that's right. And that was first wave
It
feminism.
was first, well, it was on the heels of it, because we got the suffragettes
Right.
in the turn of the century. But when women got to this point where they were openly able to just start wearing slacks and big shoulder pads and all this, I mean, bring in one of the queens of this, which is mommy dearest herself, Joan Crawford. This
Right.
was this was the way forward. And then great feminists to the movement like Katharine Hepburn. I
Mhm.
mean, I grew up loving her. Everything she said, I still do. I love her. She did
Yeah.
so much for our plight, and bringing in awareness, not just allowing women to wear trousers or be more boyish. She and intelligent, because mostly her characters, or she chose intelligent characters, and she
Right.
went for this. So when the 80s snuck back around, we're in a whole different situation now, where it's the glamorous 80s, right? Again, it was like all pop, all fresh. So much was going on in the 80s. A lot of cocaine, a lot of money, a lot of hyperbolic. Everything's flash and flare. We got the new age move. The new age movement is getting on fleek there, girl. Everybody was
Yep,
coming
yep,
new age. Shirley MacLaine out there on her limb. And
right. That's right. And we also had greed is good, right?
yes.
That big money push.
Yes, and we're seeing this in rap culture that started to actually really get going. It was late 70s it was happening. It was kind of pushed off from the beat generation with word jazz, and we had some amazing early rapping going on in the late 70s in New York. Just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And then, gangs like I say gangs because I'm talking about rap games.
Mhm.
So like Sugar Hill Gang, Grandmaster Flash. I mean,
Oh,
these
yeah.
were great. And White Line, talking the cocaine's flowing. Cocaine was
White
a sign
line.
of
So
girl, right?
iconic. And that's when we learned to do the freak.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So it's all in fun and wonderfulness, but at the same time, it was all being controlled and contrived.
Right,
And this is the thing when I talk about the folk at the bottom level, the folk that are having fun and enjoying these tides are just simply living their lives, and they're not aware that there's an agenda behind all this,
right,
and that second wave of feminism was going to absolutely destroy and not look anything like the first wave of feminism, which was out there saying women have a right to read, write, and what most of all, vote.
vote.
And not only vote, but earn a proper place in society as human beings.
Mhm.
Now, my great grandmother was a suffragette, and I still have one photo because I've been through two fires. But
Wow.
this was a big deal. This is human rights, and then human rights led into civil rights. And as we started to do these kinds of big cultural movements and shifts, and let me tell you, feminism needed to happen. Women needed to be on equal playing ground.
Mhm.
It's sad that it had to all of a sudden be co-opted and turned into women as little men. Right now, don't
Right.
get me wrong, and I may be unpopular for saying this, but I've always loved a bull dyke, and because that's what I still, all my old school bull dykes are still around me, and they still like the term bull or tomboy too,
Right,
and they're not trying to transition to anything. They are happy people who they are, living their lives who they
right.
are. As far as I know, Dykes on Bikes is still a real organization, by the way.
Ooh,
So I just want to point out that kind of stuff that newer generations are having trouble with, because they want this plight, and they want to bring in people that just like all these other movements, they want to relate, and they want to move it forward, but it's social engineered, and what is happening is there's a big separation happening. So some of my old school gay friends are absolutely put off by everything now. They don't go to Pride at all, because it's become like a sex fest in front of little kids. It's like
totally.
anything but Pride. And so, like some of my ex-gay husbands,
I have a few of those myself.
girl, of course you're a Jewish American princess. It's like we have to, in the old days, we called I never called myself a hag, but the term fag hag lived
Right,
long. I don't know if it's still out there, but I certainly applied.
right.
And anyway, but we were talking about recently how it was edgier. So when society got to the point where it was not as bad to just be who you are, and that equal rights were starting to happen, that women were starting to make paces, that gay people were starting to make paces forward in society, and all this was great, but there was still an edginess. We're still on the periphery. We're still kind of others and out there creating a counterculture that was very, very cool.
Right.
It's not that anymore. And now it's gotten so crazy through pop culture, through all this social programming, that it's become cartoonish. And my fear, Danny, is that there's going to be some sort of big whiplash now because of some of this new wave of stuff that's absolutely not organic. It's completely 100% engineered, and it makes me very sad to see how shut up we're becoming. Do you remember the meme of the duct tape on the face?
Of course.
And who's now pushing that the most? The people that have actually been cultures that have been pushed to shut up for real. Real first wave feminists, real
Yeah.
second wave feminists, real lesbians, real, dare I say, dykes and queers and transsexuals and transgenders, those people that have fought so hard to come forward and just live a decent life and not push it on everyone, but we have our own communities just like everyone else does. In Chicago is a city of cultures. You can go to Devon Street and experience the wonders of India,
Mm,
right? You can go and there's this whole Indian culture. Most of the people there are speaking in their own ethnic languages, because there's different languages through India. People don't realize that. And you go and you experience little India. Then you go to little Italy. I mean, you can go to these neighborhoods all within one city.
mm.
And what's going on now is everyone's getting pit against each other, and this homogenation meme that most people really, when they think about it, you will lose all of your cultural standing. You will lose the things that make you special and your people special by homogenizing with everything is not a cool place. I don't want to be there. I want to visit little India because I want to visit India without traveling to India. You know what I'm saying? I want to see how my Polish friends are getting on in their neighborhoods, and we come together, we work, we go to school, but they can go home and be in a place that's surrounded by their culture, and it's okay. It's a beautiful thing. We celebrate it. What's going on, Danny, with this? What is happening?
I mean, I think they for sure are trying to homogenize us. We saw it with gentrification, right? We used to road trip
Yes.
through the country, and different towns had their own different, I'd always seek out the natural food store and everything was different. And now it's all the same. I first went to India 99 to 2000, and I always had to cover my shoulders and cover my legs and wear my hair up. It was all super traditional. I went back in 2016. It was just like women in jeans and tank tops and toilet paper and gluten-free chapatis. I'm like, what happened? So I don't know if we're going to get that back, because this has happened. And as we were talking, and you were talking about white lines and like the early rap culture, I feel like that was a really big entry point for the social engineers, for the Tavistock fucktards, because through rap music, that came this like doubling down on identity, right? And that was when people started always saying their names in their songs, and everything was
Yes.
kind of that call back to themselves, and rappers wearing chains with their names on it. And I'm just wondering like how much that has affected us as a culture, because before that you didn't really hear musicians reference themselves in their songs, let alone reference how much money they had or how much better they were than other singers.
Yeah, I find that there's so much hubris and profanity, and I mean like the profane, like in a lot of these different movements. There's like, so I consider I have categories within my own head. So there's amazing rapping going on out there where there's a message happening, and it's not all bitches and money, right? Hoes and
Right.
money and all that, and then me, all that grossness that is
Mm-hmm.
just, it's just absolutely gross to me. And so that always has seemed like an insert, and it always seemed to me like it is very, very manipulated in a way that I'm wondering how in the loop these particular people are, because they're pushing it. So I'm leaving that there, but there there was always, and there still is, the original and the core. So the really great rappers out there, wherever they are, I happen to like a lot of good French rap. I love Coco Rosie, and you know,
Mhm.
they're actually rappers too. So so it's a matter of degree on what we're talking about, but it's easy to point out these that you were mentioning earlier as part of the definitely social engineered
Mhm.
organization at large. And they create these dramas that are bigger than life. And that's because they are bigger than life. That's because these are super dramas. And I think one of the clues and keys as to what is real and fake for me in the world is how much visibility is something actually getting.
Totally. Which is okay. I want to ask you about this because I did listen to your, I don't know if it's your most recent, but the Kanye thing. The Kanye
Yes.
thing being so big, so loud. Is this organic in any? This just feels so fake to me.
Yeah, okay, so the Kanye thing is very nuanced. So what what Kanye is saying is very intriguing because Kanye is following a lot of um so yeah, there's a whole sideshow here that is absolutely manipulated and for us. That's what we get with this level of people. Kanye is one of these kind of dark knights, and that's kind of what I call him. He's a dark knight where he he was the richest black man in the
Mhm.
world for a minute there, and now he's been stripped of all this. He's been talking about it allegedly.
Right,
We can't take all this at face value, but what is he representing out there? He's representing an adversary to the machine at large.
right,
And whether he's questioning the meme of Black Lives Matter, whether he's questioning the MAGA hat, and whether he's questioning the higher hand of the Jews that he's talking about, which has nothing to do with the Jewish people at large.
right,
And that, Danny, is something that I think needs to be really addressed far and wide, because just like all the Catholics, all the millions of Catholics are not, that are not standing for what's gone on in the name of the Jesuits, in the name of all this child trafficking and all this nastiness that's come out through the Catholic Church. That doesn't represent the folk, the Catholic people. They are not standing behind it. In fact, they have been hurt by it. So to me, I see this with the Jewish people as well. You can't talk about these controlling factions and think that all the people that go by or value whatever the teachings are in a said religion are even aware of what those people up there are doing, and those aren't humans. And that's my thing. It's like, why can't we mention them? Why can't Kanye mention them?
right,
There's some sort of network. It used to be big trouble to call out the Jesuits.
right.
And that came and kind of went. People can openly call them out now. And so now trying to separate this faction of shadow hand from the actual Jewish people is very tricky, because they have landed themselves and interstitched themselves so deeply in Jewish culture, and they're not Jews.
Right. I'm so happy that you said that because I've had multiple conversations about this with other people in our community. And from my perspective, I'm like, yes, we need to have this conversation for sure. But if we're not going to call out the Khazars who are pretending to be Jews, and we're not going to really dive in to that piece of it, or if they're, another piece that you're referencing, then we can't have the conversation. And one thing, I mean, there were a lot of things about the Kanye thing that smelled funny to me. And I really like Kanye. I think he's super interesting. I think he's an interesting artist. I think he's an interesting kind of Heyoka figure. But
He's a good show. He's a good show to
he's a
watch.
great show. But like the thing with Candace at Fashion Week, which allegedly happened before this,
Yes.
happened just after Candace announced her Glorify, payment processing platform. So she announced that on October 5th. I think it might have been the 6th that she shows up at Fashion Week, which is, yeah, that's Kanye's realm, but that's not Candace's realm. And then that same week, Kanye says this about the Jewish people, right? And Kanye has said the Jewish people multiple times, where I'm like, that feels out of character. But
Yes.
and then he gets unbanked from Chase, and I'm like, well, that was so convenient given the Glorify thing. So that's where I'm like, I don't know if I'm really buying it.
It's confusing, and that's, this kind of where Amy D and I are at with it too, is there's a lot of mixed signaling going on. This is not easy to this ball is not easy to unwind.
Right.
So say, for example, the Doja Cat birthday thing, that is set up. That was 100% bullshit. And
so what happened? The last I know about Doja Cat is that she shaved off her eyebrows.
Well, yeah, she went through the humiliation stuff that's very common to people who understand all this.
Right.
And the best way to do that, they always want you to do it by your own hand.
Oh, okay.
Because you're still your hand's still there, and this is a very specific set of actions, if you will, and we've seen this with a lot of people, and I've seen this in private. I've seen this. Well, this happened to my mom. She ended up with the shaved head too. There's a whole story there.
Whoa.
This is a standard practice. And we got a good glimpse with Britney, right? Doja Cat's was more interesting to me than any that I've seen, in that she really seemed to, she seemed very unhappy. I hate my job, etc. Now she's shaving her head and her eyebrows, saying, I've always felt better hair. I'm hairless, blah, blah, blah. And then we get the black eye situation, and then we get this birthday thing, and her 27th birthday. And so Amy D and I really wanted to cover that, the 27 thing, because it's a big deal. But when I looked at just the small clips of the birthday situation, I was like, and Amy was like, girl, I don't know. And I said, no, girl, we're not, this isn't even, we'll make this comment. And this is our comment, basically. This is staged and set up. No way in hell that cake alone, and that was all I needed to see, would ever be from that real hand, the dark shadow hand. Never, never, never. That is profane. That's pearls before swine, in a certain sense. It's 100% an act. It was 100% for stage. It was 100% for people who think they understand what these symbols are. It's low hanging fruit. It meant nothing. It's a distraction. And the whole thing, I see where they wanted to go with it, was to tie back to the 1972 Rothschilds Surrealist Ball, where we have Dali there, and which is absolutely fantastic, by the way. I personally remember seeing those photos, I don't know, in the 70s or early 80s in like Time magazine or something, because it had all those big stars like Dali, the surrealist. The whole thing was a surrealist ball. Whether or not they got up to some nasty business after that, I don't know. But as an artist and a lover of art and symbolist artism, symbolist art and surrealist art, I still love it. I don't see anything in that imagery that ever bothered me personally. I know that those hardcore kind of orthodox people out there, you can't even flatulate 3 times in a row or you're all of a sudden satanic. So, you know what I'm saying? For those people, they're going to do that. But what goes on, and we know that these circles are doing bad things. I'm not trying to cover that up, but they put that in plain sight, and they put it in plain sight for a reason. And there's a reason why people like Dolly were absolutely at the core of that. That's another story, but we ripple that forward a couple times, because there's been iterations of that, to what they were trying to make as a loose iteration with Doja Cat's 27th birthday, and it fell flat on its face. It's a cheap cheap facsimile of that original, and it's for all these Orthodox people to go, oh my God, the compass and the square and the eye and the 27 on the black and white cake. I mean, come on, people. If
Right.
it's that easy, you are the chump.
Right.
The real stuff, Danny, is actually sophisticated.
Right.
The real stuff is in what you don't see. It's between the lines. It's for people that have that, what we call, and how I consider most human, brilliant quality, synthesizing material.
Mhm.
Anyone can learn all the rules to astrology. The great astrologers understand how to synthesize the material. Anyone can learn anything and regurgitate it. It is in taking that material and moving it further. And how do you take that material and move it further? Well, first of all, you're open to the world around you and other material, and then you start synthesizing it, because that material had come from somewhere else, and somebody else that you're thinking's great did the same thing and keeps going back.
Right. And so, like, because I know a lot of people think that Kanye's this like wild card who's out of control and, is doing good. Do you think that? Do you think he's being controlled? Do you think is this an op that we're seeing?
I think this is like the Prestige. I'm not exactly sure the full trick here, but I
Mhm.
do believe there's a trick.
And I also think it's interesting that it came within at least a couple weeks of the Rashida Tlaib thing about Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're prepping for some big Israel thing, and I see them engineering. I don't know if it's going to be Jews and blacks or just Jews in the rest of the world. Because I notice in the like woke op, Jews aren't protected in that. They're not part of that. But then you have the weird Israel thing, which is just gross, right? You can't criticize Israel without being accused of being an anti-Semite. So they're
Yep.
kind of use Jews as body armor to protect that thing. And I'm wondering, like, if we're going to see real deal exposure or if this is just another trick.
Well, see, this is interesting. So and I love, of course, I love that you're willing to talk about this. I certainly am willing to talk about this. It's caused me some problems. I ain't gonna lie.
In real life or on the internet?
In both.
Okay.
In both. And this is why I keep needing to make that statement that the Jewish people is not this set of people that are being considered Jews. It's a whole separate thing. They are walking amongst them. It's even in the text, those that are Jews that are not Jews. It's
Right.
in everything. And it doesn't just apply to Jews. It applies to all these different, I mean, look at the beautiful Muslim, look at the how can you look at Rumi, and how can you look at the Sufis and think
Mhm.
terrible things of those Muslims?
Right. Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
come on. It's we need to get outside of these that where you got to get into the nuance, because you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And everything is nuance, and this is why it's sophisticated, and this is why it needs people that function at a higher level and understand synthesis of material to really get an idea of what this is. Everyone that's functioning at 8th grade and lower, and I'm being judicious with that,
Mhm.
that's just throwing this pop candy at everyone, that's racist. That's racist. Everything's racist. So far it's racist.
Right.
Those people to me are so insignificant, and I just challenge them to start learning how to read and write first.
Right.
And because there's a statistic out now that people are not learning how to read and write in school because computers do it for them. So when we're back to this whole Kanye Jewish thing, so I want to bring us back where we are, Danny. We're an American culture.
Yeah.
And American culture is very unique in the world, as we know. And what I was pointing out was Chicago's a great old school. No more. Was a great old school town, just like New York, right?
Mhm.
New York City, where you had a whole bunch of cultures coexisting. Now, there might have been, we got West Side Story straight out of Tavistock, but there might have been, inner stuff. I remember in the 80s when everything was a joke on Polish people. Do you remember
Right?
that?
Oh, totally. Polak jokes there were like books of Polak jokes.
They made really for jokes for the John the Polak series.
Right.
And so, and I have Slavic in me and all that, and I just remember thinking, wow, why Polacks, why Polish people, why are Polish people the butt of every joke? And it was a big deal. Nobody really remembers that unless they lived through it, but they had joke books specifically about Polacks.
Totally.
So that's Polish people. And so, and I want to remind everyone that a lot of Polish people were actually and are actually Jewish. I know genetic Jews in Israel that are my friends that are of Polish descent.
Mhm.
So, and this is another idea that people don't understand when they're starting to think about what culture is, what culturalism is, what natural, what this whole uh association with identity through culture. There's all the different names for it. It's a very interesting thing. And then from my perspective is, well, we're transient here anyway.
Right.
This is actually skin deep to me. I mean, come on. But when we're talking about Kanye and we're talking about his messaging, I have noticed him grouping all the Jewish people into one statement, and that's a red flag for me. Like, could he just actually take the education to the higher level where it needs to be and not blame a whole bunch of people for something they have no idea about or and don't even participate in? So when we come back to American culture, like you and I growing up with it, Jewish American princess thing. I mean, that was so 80s. And and how we were very specific here with multiculturalism. It is just the story of America. When you go to other places, it's a different idea of culture because you're talking about culturally rich areas. So you go to Somalia, you expect Somalians, right?
Right.
And Denmark, you expect to experience those people in that culture. Well, Jews are all over.
Right.
They're all over. And I think people get the sense that Jewish people are actually a genetic race. Now, when you do your DNA, you Ashkenazi shows up, right?
Right.
So you've got that. But I just, like any other religion, Catholics, for example, are all kinds of different people. I mean,
Right.
including ex-Jews that are Catholics. I know so many pagans and New Agers that are ex everything,
Right.
right? And so I think that distinction needs to be made. So I think if Kanye is actually trying to let everyone know that there is a bigger move going on, he needs to be very specific with that languaging. And instead of throwing all Jews in that boat, that's very dangerous to me. And like you're asking, are they trying to make this pitting Black people against Jewish people, and more specifically in Kanye's American context? This is playing out in America, just like the Black community all of a sudden started attacking the Chinese community recently.
Right.
What in the hell is going on? And right now, it doesn't matter where you are or how. If you are visually presenting as a white person, you are definitely at the bottom of the boat right now. You
Right.
too, as a Jewish American princess, because you look like a white girl.
Of course, which is where it gets confusing with the whole like oppression Olympics game that I don't even play.
Yes.
I think, but that's the piece that had me. Not that I know Kanye at all, but the fact that he is, and he's kind of doubling down. I've heard him say it multiple times. The Jewish people. I'm like, I don't believe that he would really say that. If he
I
wants to
don't
call
either.
it the Jewish banking cabal, like I thought it was funny when he was on Lex Friedman and Lex is like, well, I have a problem with you saying the Jewish media. And he's like, why? Because it's redundant. And I was like, that is hilarious. Like, I love that. I think that he's being really cheeky. But the fact that he's calling out the Jewish people and not, you know, the societies or the Khazarians or whatnot, that's where I'm like, this is an op, because I think that he's smarter than that.
I do too. And that's what's interesting. But he really only started to do this after the Black Lives Matter, White Lives
Right.
Matter thing. It
Right.
became when they started taking everything away from him, whomever they are. I don't know who the they is there, but whomever started canceling him from everything for saying wearing the t-shirt with Candace, and you know, we have to question everyone, not just who you think your enemies are or who you think is in control. You need to question yourself, start there, and then move
Totally.
out. But this thing does smell fishy to me with Kanye, because he really does do better in the past with being specific about certain things. And it's interesting that every time he gets a little bit off center, that they start in with his psychological tabs, right?
Right.
Titles. He's bipolar, or he's, you know, this. Again, psychology comes in to make the situation worse.
100%. And I think that's another op that they've been seeding for the past couple of years, this whole mental illness piece, you know, and it's another way to bring in big pharma, and Lord knows what else is it, you know, is layered into the pharmaceuticals. But I think that's certainly a piece of it. And I also think it's interesting that he's this kind of, you know, he has his hand in so many places, in fashion, in music, in pop culture. It's just, and just given the volume of this, like sometimes I don't even need the specifics. I'm like, just the volume lets me know that we're all being played.
Yes. And see, this is what's important, because again, richest Black man in the world, at least on by the books, right?
Right.
Huge platform, huge reach through fashion, music,
Mm-hmm.
politics, entertainers of every kind. I mean, he is massive. And he also was feeling at some point that would get him somewhere, because I listened to some of these apologies he's been making, and I'm like, and so this this seems to me right now, Kanye is walking a tightrope,
Mm-hmm.
where I think he's trying to maintain. I mean, he got fined $27 million, like out of nowhere. He got
Wait. What was this fine for?
I just heard it on his an interview with him this last week, where he just got slapped with this big gigantic fine. So it's out there. He's talking about it. I don't have that receipt here and ready for me, but if we had Amy D.
Yeah, Amy B would come through. I mean, I certainly hope it's not for what he said. Like, people need to be allowed to say hateful shit, dumb shit. Like, I'm just such a free speech absolutist. Like, this is also insane. No one had a problem with um Jesse Jackson calling New York Town. He wasn't canceled for any of that. That's why it just feels like a show.
It is. It is all a big show. But the thing is, not everyone is a puppet in it. And that's the hard thing to understand here, because there are people out there saying the whole thing is a show. Now, we do see, what do we see? We do see a lot of people that seem to be untouchable get into, in particular, the realm of political influence. And you know, Kanye has been teetering back and forth in that arena. And so with
Right.
Candace, with Trump, and all of his other political affiliations that have been very public, that we need to understand that something about the political arena, wherever you are, wherever you are in the realm, there is some sort of transformation that happens to these people. I've
Right.
seen so many people that I thought were good people had their heads on straight as far as really wanting to make change for whatever their cause is, go in and turn ghoulish
Right.
and not deliver any of it. There's a chance. We even saw this with Trump. I don't care who you are and how you feel about Trump. I'll tell you what, and I'm not a believer in any of this. I don't think I'm one of these people that really, this whole thing is a stage. But
Right.
I'll tell you what, Trump was entertaining to watch. Kanye is entertaining to watch. And so I'd rather watch those kinds of fools than say the really gross, terrible actors like AOC
Ugh.
and Nancy Pelosi and
Right.
people like that. These are they're not as, they don't have as much depth as some of these really hardcore individuals that really you can't take your eyes off of, and Kanye gives you that, just like Trump did. I mean, look at who's going to come to Trump's defense as far as his personal life? Girl, please. He has been a terrible
Of
womanizer
course.
and an asshole for a long time. He's got bad business behind him. But one thing about him that seemed interesting when this is funny. When I first saw his tax proposal, when he threw his hat in,
Hmm.
this is when I lost a lot of friends, by the way. I was still on Facebook, and I
Hmm.
read through this thing, and it wasn't a gigantic beast of a thing. I thought, oh, these taxes seem kind of actually better than all the other taxes so far. Like, he was explaining his tax packet that he was going to bring forward in a way that made some sense. Now, I don't like any of it. I'm all not having any of that, by the way,
Right.
just letting you know. But I thought that seemed more fair, especially coming out from under the grossness of what Obama did with
Ugh.
so much. I mean, Obama really signed away American sovereignty, and starting with the big tax, Obamacare, right? National health
Right.
care, and making everyone uh turned it into a tax and turned a terrible monster. And I read all 1,578 pages or whatever it was.
Whoa.
I sat through that stuff and I just kept going. My mom, the whole time, and then all the extra stuff that got thrown in there had nothing to
Right.
do with it. So Trump's was really concise. um, I don't like any of that languaging, but I put that up. I'm like, this seems like the fairest tax deal I've seen if you believe in that stuff. And I
Right.
I lost like 400 friends. And this is before he officially ran. He's like, well, if I run, this is what, this is a sign of what my tax was. And I had people actually say to me, all my hipster friends, they're like, at that time, and now I knew Trump was going to run. At that time, they said, this is all just a joke. It's promoting his TV show. I'm like, no, I think this is real. And that was where I started to lose people. And then when he did officially come in, and there's that post, then everyone was just so sickened that I had agreed to it, and I didn't. I just said, this doesn't look as bad as it. My point was, it didn't look that bad, and my bigger point was the Democrats at that time were saying he had no tax plan. So that was coming out of the Hillary camp.
Right.
Now this is fresh off the hills of WikiLeaks stuff with Hillary and Podesta, and all the child eating, all the child trafficking, all the adrenochrome stuff that involved major world leaders across the world, that involved the terrible exploitation that's gone on in Haiti and in South America through Arkansas. Arkansas is like the seventh pit of hell, and people don't even realize that.
Mm. It's so nuts that so even back then you lost a huge chunk of friends. And what do you attribute that to? You, is that straight up mind control? Is there a demonic takeover that has people not even able to discuss policies or proposals? Like what is it that has made everyone so intolerant and basic and insane?
I can't remember, and I think it was a season of American Horror Story. I could be wrong, or it was those guys that put something together. Oh, geez. Oh man, what was it? It might have been one of their sub shows, and I can't remember right now, but it was early Hollywood. And when they first started to realize that when I think Louis B. Mayer, and I could be wrong, I do need to look this up, but it shocked me how in our faces this was.
Mhm.
When they first realized that they could use the then talkies, right? The
Right.
early spoken movies and stuff, when they realized they could take their actors that were out of work, that needed work, they
Mhm.
were starving, they needed work, take the out of work actors that had big names when the ones that didn't make it when we went from silent to talkies.
Mhm.
And so big names in silent film, not so big when we went to talkies, and we had a whole switch over of people. So those people who were still friends with all these other people, they put them to work doing internal LA political campaigning, and it was all
Oh.
lies, it was all this stuff going on, and that was the birth of kind of the modern day commercial, political season commercial, attacks towards each other, and it got very sophisticated. So this is the birth of it back there. It's like
Mhm.
1919 or in there somewhere, and it might have been in the 20s. I think it was after, so yeah, it's 1930s. It's
Mhm.
after the stock market. And and so we saw the birth of that through Hollywood here in America. And it started really local in LA with local politics that were going to get in bed with what some of the big runners in Hollywood were doing. And, David O. Selznick, Louis B. Mayer, all these big monsters there. And this ties in, of course, 100% ties into some of the other stuff we see down the road a little bit later, the Elizabeth Short stuff that is very interesting in 1947 as an example, as a playing card that got laid. Nobody wants to talk about that.
Well,
Anyway,
will you catch us up to speed on what that is?
that's the Black Dahlia.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And so, and that plays into a lot of other stuff I talked to. But what I'm talking about here is the political game. So
Mhm.
when this was such a success in LA, that political presidential candidates and local governor candidate, this took off. This became a sub industry, and that's what we see now, and we've seen our whole entire lives with the season of the political commercials that are just vitriol and nasty. And
Nasty. It's so low vibe these days. The mudslinging, like
the
I'm
art, they
embarrassed for.
lost the art of it, Danny. They lost the art of it.
It's like dog fighting. It's just so trashy at this point.
Well, this is where society is. This is where pop
Right.
culture is.
Right.
And that's the whole point of all this. This is where, because remember, they're playing to the audience.
Right.
And we need to always remember this with pop culture. Who are they playing to? They're playing to the audience. Well, who's the audience? The people that are actually watching them and funding them. Now, this isn't I'm not talking the big time funders that are behind there with the black budget and stuff. I'm talking about the person that goes and buys that Gucci bag off of eBay because they need that Gucci bag, right? That
Right.
audience.
Right.
That's a fake, right? That audience. And of course, the people that can afford the Gucci bag and they're just that are getting pillow face, they're just that vacuous.
Right.
That audience, there's a lot of money in that audience. So this is all about where it's all carny in the end. It's all carny, and they just need your participation. However, you give it by attention, you give it by money, you give it by action, you give it by voice, you give it by vote. There's so many ways to get ensnared in this. And this is why it's important to see what's going on through a different lens, by checking your emotional meter, by putting
Right.
your emotions in a chest somewhere and approaching all the material you're seeing in the outer world with that kind of non-emotional place. Now,
Mhm.
it's good to check in with your emotions. How do I feel about this? How do I feel about this? But when you're dealing with it, it's good to keep the emotions out because you need to stay clear. And this unfortunately leads a lot of people to the point where they don't vote, they don't pay taxes, and they're trying to check out. And that's great because I'm all in that camp. And all I want to say with that is I love that chef's kiss. And then understanding, well, how do you check out? There are ways to opt out. But the problem is you can't follow the ones that are telling you to opt out with join this program and pay this money to get this form, and then you'll just see another lineup of a person going to jail for doing some shit that made no sense.
Right.
And I mean, there's a lot of pitfalls here. This is all like the land of the dead, and it's all like the way, say, tomes like the Egyptian Book of the Dead or Going Forth by Day are talking about navigating this hellscape, because everything kind of is sticky. Everything kind of has a little bit of a trap to it. And the further into the digital realm we get, the harder it is, as we were talking about earlier. And everything that we're experiencing in culture right now, if you're seeing it and it's got a high volume of people, it's getting splayed everywhere. It's serving two purposes. It's one purpose is probably to distract you from something else. And another purpose is to keep that adrenaline going and to drain those adrenos, to keep everyone in this massive trauma event that is ongoing.